अस्सलाम वालेकुम नाज़रीन, आप देख रहे हैं नसीम ज़हरा टेट। आज एक बड़ा दिलचस्प हम प्रोग्राम आपके लिए लेके आए हैं। एक ऐसा मुल्क जो अगर हम कहें कि यूरोप में, वेस्ट में, इस मुल्क की पाकिस्तान के साथ एक स्पेशल रिलेशनशिप है। स्पेशल रिलेशनशिप यूँ कि हमारे लाखों पाकिस्तानी वहाँ मुकीम हैं और बहुत से हैं जो जाके ब्रिटिश नेशनैलिटी उन्होंने ले ली। और हम देखते हैं कि जो सियासतदान वगैरह है वो जाते हैं, वो जो एग्ज़ाइल में जाते हैं वो जाके ब्रिटेन में बैठ जाते हैं, पैसा उठाते हैं, लोग लेके चले जाते हैं ब्रिटेन में। बिज़नेस ब्रिटेन के साथ हमारी अच्छी है और ताल्लुकात जनरली अच्छे हैं और जैसे हम कहेंगे इट्स अ स्पेशल रिलेशनशिप वी हैव विद ब्रिटेन। तो हम आज वी आर वेरी फॉर्चुनेट कि हमारे स्टूडियो में आज हिज एक्सेलेंसी हाई कमिश्नर क्रिस्टियन टर्नर आए हैं। उनको हमने दावत दी और हमने कहा उनसे ज़रा कुछ गपशप करें, बहुत से इशूज़ हैं जिस पर बात करने की ज़रूरत है। और नाज़रीन, आपको मालूम है लाहौर में अभी लाहौर का कहा गया कि स्मॉग रिडन नंबर 1 सिटी इन द वर्ल्ड। इसका क्या मतलब हुआ? इसका मतलब कि क्लाइमेट का जो इशू है वो बड़ा सीरियस इशू है हमारे लिए कि मौसम की वजह से क्या जो मौसम में तब्दीली आ रही है, क्या कोई बहुत ज़्यादा बहरान आ जाएगा पूरी दुनिया में। और पाकिस्तान में आप देखिएगा क्या हुआ पिछले कुछ दिनों में। और हमें मालूम है सियाचिन के वहाँ ग्लेशियर्स हैं वो भी पिघल रहे हैं। और इसलिए हम बात करें क्योंकि आपको मालूम है ग्लासगो में अभी पिछले हफ्ते ही 2 हफ्ते की लंबी एक कॉन्फ्रेंस हुई जहाँ से लीडर्स गए और उन्होंने कहा कि COP26 उसको कहते हैं कि कॉन्फ्रेंस ऑफ पार्टिसिपेंट्स, ये 26वीं थी। तो वहाँ एक अलामिया भी जारी हुआ, लेकिन कुछ लोग कहते हैं वो अलामिया ज़्यादा इफ़ेक्टिव नहीं था। तो बहरहाल हाई कमिश्नर साहब से बहुत सी बातें करनी है, क्लाइमेट की भी करेंगे, ख़ित्ते की भी करेंगे और बहुत सी करेंगे। Thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Nasim. Assalamu alaikum and very good to be here and hello to all of the viewers.
Yeah, thank you for coming to the studio. So let's start with what you are for now very proud of in terms of the hosting COP26. And what's come out of COP26, there are different views. There is a view which says, well, it's not binding, the commitments aren't binding, and 2, that not enough has been done. And yet when you look at the Prime Minister of Tuvalu, that island, who addressed half in water, and then they brought
sinking beneath the waves.
And you had people from one organization, UK organization, bring ice from the Arctic, Greenland, to show that global warming is creating crisis. What would you say?
Well, look, first of all, as you just said, I mean, this is an incredibly important issue, and it's easy in our lives, in our politics, for leaders to focus on the urgent, but also we must focus on the important, and that's why the UK wanted to host this big climate change summit. It's the first for several years. 130 countries and world leaders present. I think 200 countries signed up to the final pact.
Yes.
And about 40,000 people. So it's an enormous international effort to try and get people aligned. The first point is exactly as you said, the science is clear. The world is hotting up. And nowhere is that more true than here in Pakistan. You mentioned the glaciers, the floods. Pakistan in the end relies on the Indus River Basin for its water. If we see a 30% drop in availability of water, that's going to affect everyone's lives here. If we see more flooding in cities like Karachi, the melting of those glaciers, as I said. So I think these are very, very real issues for us and ones that we have to, for our children, our grandchildren, take very seriously. What did the summit agree? I mean, these summits, always we're going to want to see more out of them. And the nature of diplomacy is you can't force other countries, sovereign countries, to take decisions. The sense from the presidency, from the UK's role as leadership, was it made some good steps. Of course, we want to see more. But there were some quite big things that were agreed. Overall, if all of the commitments made at Glasgow are implemented by the countries, so implementation is what matters, it will see quite a significant drop in the predicted temperature rise for the planet. So broadly speaking,
1.5 C is what
well,
we're hoping for.
1.5 C is what we're hoping for.
Yeah.
And the scientists say if we go above 1.5, we see those really dangerous impacts on our climate and much more of these hot weather events, these extreme weather events, and everything else that is happening. We're currently on track for about 2.7%. So that's almost double that 1.5. That's pretty scary, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Europe, we're talking about Pakistan and this region, but Europe has experienced the most strange winter as of now.
But I think this
summer
is true of all countries. The hottest place in the world this year was in Pakistan. You know, so every country is having these kind of really strange events.
Yeah.
And if all these pledges made at Glasgow are implemented, it will drop that. The scientists will debate it, but it will drop it to maybe 2.3. So that is a very significant step if we can implement what was agreed.
But as you said, the catchword, the real word is implement. And in fact, as the agreement was coming to a close, China and India pulled back and, you know, diluted the whole issue on use of coal, which is supposed to be one that is, you know, emitting methylene and so on.
And I agree that coal was a very, very important part of the conversation, and Pakistan itself has committed to no new imported coal power. And it's the first time in any of these summits on climate change, which have been running for about 20 years now, coal was mentioned in the pact. That in itself is significant. And perhaps for me, the most striking announcement in the 2 weeks of the talks, so this wasn't well publicized, was a group of finance houses, the people who do the money, the banks. And 450 of these big financial houses came together, and they said that all of their assets under management would be in line with the Paris Agreement that led to Glasgow.
Yeah.
That represents over $100 trillion US dollars. 100 trillion. I mean, it's such a big amount of money, none of us can think about it. From here on, they manage that amount of money in the world, and they say that money will be in line with our climate commitments. And what that says is that global finance is flowing away from carbon and is flowing away from coal. So if you now want to go and build a new power station, country X or Y, it's basically going to be very expensive and much harder to finance than if you wanted to build solar or wind and other renewable energy.
I mean, obviously there is the other criticism that it's the developed countries from where the emissions are at the maximum, and, you know, the developed countries don't make the kind of commitment that's required. So there's always this issue of, you know, kind of hypocrisy where the words are the loudest from the developed countries and the actions don't match the words.
So you're right, there's a sort of question of historic fairness, that the countries that industrialized early share, it is argued, the burden of the blame for the carbon that's in the atmosphere, and countries that are developing, which include Pakistan, should be allowed to develop accordingly. So the solution we have to find is really the money for them to develop cleanly. And Pakistan, again, I think, put out a very ambitious pledge for 60% of energy to come from renewables by 2030. Of course, renewables now are much, much cheaper than they were even 10 years ago. Solar and wind, these are much more accessible technologies. And again, one of the most important things agreed in Glasgow was the finance, was the cash that needs to flow to countries like Pakistan to help them in that transition.
Yeah, on Pakistan, your own Prime Minister at the UN, you know, basically called out positively our Prime Minister in terms of his commitment to, you know, improving things in terms of, you know, in the area of climate change.
And Pakistan has a real leadership role.
Yeah.
The Billion Tree Tsunami, this coal initiative.
And on gasoline also, I think they've kind of going for clean gas.
Well, all of these steps, we would argue, are necessary, but I accept that countries like Pakistan need finance for that, and the figure that is given is $100 billion US a year, and again, that was agreed to be in place by 2023. So I think the answer is, it's quite easy to be scared by these stories, these images of these disasters.
Yeah.
It is doable. We have the ability to do it. The UK has dropped its carbon emissions very, very significantly since 1990, 40% plus. But it's done that while its economy has grown. So it's not a choice between growing and developing and having prosperity and being good to the environment. We can do both.
You can do both, and UK has stepped in to help Pakistan on climate change and the initiatives.
So
Tell us about that.
A couple of things specifically we've done. The first is to recognise that we need the private sector helping us. It's all very well governments and diplomats like me dictating, but actually if companies don't see the benefit...
We don't take dictation.
Indeed, dictating is not a good idea for a diplomat.
Not a good idea.
So we've worked with some of Pakistan's leading companies on a campaign called 26 for 26, 26 companies for COP26.
Yeah. Okay.
And they all signed up to halve their emissions by 2030 and net zero by 2050. And what was fascinating is when we talked to some of these, big textile manufacturers, some of the biggest industries in Pakistan, their chief executives were saying to us, this makes business sense. We're finding inefficiencies in our supply chain, the way we use our water, the way we source our electricity. And actually, it's better for us.
It's initiated already, or is it just in the planning
stage? And I would say, if any are viewing, if other companies want to join this, we're happy to have them. We'll make it 52 for 26. We'll double it.
Really? And when was it initiated?
We initiated it in the summer. And all we're really doing is connecting these companies with the expertise. There are various initiatives, one called the Pakistan Environment Trust, others who will help companies work through how to audit their carbon and find these efficiencies. The other thing we've done is we are trying to put British aid in support of Pakistan on this, and £55 million of climate-related assistance, which really is focusing on three areas. The first is water use and making our water use more efficient, more sustainable.
We need it badly.
The second, I agree with that. The second is on the resilience of the country, so how you have defences against things like flooding. And then the third is to the trees and the nature, is how you can have how you can capitalise the nature and create bonds out of it. So I'm a fan of saying if you don't count it, it doesn't count. So you have to put a value on it, and therefore we can bring expertise to help Pakistan do that.
So all of this is initiated, even what you talk about now.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I hope it's a very big statement of the broader relationship you described at the outset between our two countries, the UK-Pak dosti, as we like to say. Hum ek saath saath on climate change.
Ek saath saath. And in any case, in the realm of environment, the globe is a village, right?
Right. As you said, with the smog in Lahore, something that affects people every day, doesn't respect borders. Now, that isn't just that is partly related to climate change, but it's related to other practices like industry, traffic use, crop burning. We've invested in supporting the zigzag technology and the brick kilns. This is quite well known now, and it needs quite simple but solutions that one of them alone won't work. You have to bring them all together. All together, collectively. And that improves people's livelihoods, their lives, their health.
Sure. So before we conclude on the climate change, just tell me, in Britain, has there been we need to have a sense of excitement amongst the people for anything that we do. Like even when you talk about climate change, conserving water, was there any campaign that was started in the UK and you can turn around and say, look, this really worked,
Yeah, it's a good question, and there was. I think there was a real tipping point a couple of years ago, and it was a very popular TV programme made by the BBC about planet Earth called The Blue Planet, with a very famous filmmaker called David Attenborough. Some of you may be familiar with him. And he highlighted the issue of plastic in the oceans and how much...
What an issue that is.
You will notice tonight I'm drinking from a glass because there is too much plastic everywhere.
And we gave you the glass.
You did give me the glass and you gave me the pani, bahut shukriya. But that program on TV really caught the young generation's attention.
That's the important thing.
And I think when you boil this down to individual actions, if you're brushing your teeth, do you turn off the tap when you do it?
What a difference.
When you have a bottle of pani, do you throw it in the bin? Do you throw it out of the window? Or better, do you recycle it? And why is it a plastic bottle in the first place? Why aren't you using a glass or something else? And what Attenborough showed is these very small actions can, if we all do them, have an impact. And that gives me hope. And I have to say, probably the biggest advocate on climate change that I personally know is my daughter.
Really?
And when my daughter, as most fathers know, when my daughter is having a go at me, I just do what she says.
You know what to do, and you know who's the boss also. नाज़रीन, ब्रेक लेते हैं, बाद वापस आते हैं, फिर और इश्यूज पे गुफ्तगू करते हैं. Stay with us. वेलकम बैक नाज़रीन, हमारे साथ बड़े आज एक स्पेशल गेस्ट हैं और ब्रिटिश हाई कमिश्नर है। उनसे बात हम वो करेंगे जो आपके दिल में भी है, हमारे दिल में भी है। ये इन्होंने किया क्यों था? कुछ अच्छा भी किया, कुछ गड़बड़ भी हो गई। सो द क्रिकेट टीम it decided not to come. You cancelled last minute, and we were so upset, and all the rest, but you were very good about it.
Well, thank you.
You really were like Pakistan's ambassador.
Yeah, and look, I am Britain's ambassador. I'm not here to be a cheerleader for Pakistan. I'm here to advance British interests. But where I see things that I think are incorrect, I think it's my job to be honest about them. Good. And in this instance, this was a decision taken by the England and Wales Cricket Board. They're independent of government. They don't take instruction from me or anyone in officialdom. But I tried to be clear that this was not a decision that was given on my advice, and it wasn't a decision on security grounds.
No travel advisory.
No travel advisory. And really, if I had a security concern, it would have been there on the travel advisory.
It was in NZ advisory, right?
Well, so there was an initial decision by New Zealand, which was a sovereign decision for them and the Black Caps. Yeah. And then people, as ever, love a conspiracy and thought, well, the English have followed and this must be some big conspiracy. But actually, the ECB put out their statement, made clear that it was about the schedule running into the World Cup. And I think, look, the good news out of it is that England have recommitted to what they'd always agreed, which is for a full proper tour of England next autumn, in the autumn of 22. And actually they have since announced 2 extra T20s to make up for the ones that were cancelled. So inshallah, we will look forward to a really amazing tour. It'll be 4 or 5 weeks. We'll see test matches, one-day internationals, T20s next autumn. And no one will be more happy than I when we see that happen.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. The other thing I should say, and I have to tread very carefully here, because I might be undiplomatic, is the World Cup.
Are you coming to a new topic? But let's just...
No, on the cricket, I was just going to say that it would have made me very, very happy if England and Pakistan had faced each other in the recent World Cup final.
I think it would have been great. We would have loved beating you in cricket.
Well, who says you would have beaten us? I think I would have had 2 shirts, a Pakistan one and an England one, and then I would have decided which one to wear. And in the end, those nice fellows from New Zealand and Australia, I went to bed early on Sunday night.
I know. I have to admit, I didn't watch the match. And when Pakistan was playing Australia, I was watching it as if I was playing the match, standing, not even...
but it was the same in both games. About over 17, Pakistan was winning, England was winning, and then suddenly...
It turned.
So mujhe afsos hai. It was not a...
बहुत अफसोस है. But I think that the England team not arriving, I mean, Pakistan also felt like slighted, like, we helped, we went, and so that... It was the wrong decision.
But look, I understand the disappointment, and that's why I spoke out about it. And I think that plays... We've already touched on the UK Pack Dosti, but so much of my work here, on whatever the issues are, comes back to these really close ties between the two countries. It's a living link. We understand each other very, very well. We have history. It doesn't mean we always agree. But it means that we are irreducible because we have so much of a connection. 1% of our population is of Pakistani heritage, 1.6 million people. And it's what makes my job such a privilege because I sit in the middle of that relationship. Yeah,
and it is wonderful. I mean, when it works, it's wonderful. When there are issues, then it can be equally the
well, then we have to work all the harder to
solve the issues. But there's one question when the England team is coming next year. And so will there be... people were asking me to ask you, cricket fans, some of the cricket fans, they said, ask the High Commissioner, is there a possibility of a trilateral series taking place? Will he push for something like this?
Well, really that's in the hands of the cricketing authorities, and most of this actually comes to the sort of world schedule. If you look at the way all the teams are playing, sort of for the next 3 years, they're trying to work out when they're playing in their domestic leagues, when they're playing internationally, the tournaments. So actually finding these windows, it's not as easy as saying, well, we're not coming this week, we'll tour in 2 months. You have to plan quite far and ahead. So,
but that would be wonderful if you had a kind of trilateral series.
Yeah, and look, the more England are playing here, the happier I will be. And the first piece I want to get across is for the first time in what will be 17 years to have an England's team touring here. 17 years. That's why I will be the happiest man in the country.
Yeah, inshallah when they come. So we were talking about history, etc., and how we have shared concerns, in some cases shared values, we have disagreements as well. Let's look at, in terms of history, on the Kashmir issue, and you have a lot of Kashmiris there and a very active Kashmiri community, in your parliament. I think in keeping with that, we had your Foreign Secretary Jack Straw be very active in 2002, 2008, somewhere
about
there.
20 years ago.
Yeah. So where is Britain right now with the issue very much there and gotten worse? Is there any? Can we expect any? Back channel or any kind of...
So look, I mean, I often get asked about this. I recognise what a difficult issue it is, and I recognise the history. All over the world there are issues where you say to a British diplomat, do you have a historic role? Often the answer is yes, we do, and I don't wish to shy away from that. But our position now hasn't actually changed since the time that Jack Straw was heavily involved. It was a different context then. The politics were different. It was coming off of a very high period of tensions. Is that my government thinks that this is a dispute that has to be resolved between the two principal countries, India and Pakistan, in accordance with the wishes of the Kashmiri people.
In accordance with the wishes.
Yeah, that is our stated position. For our part, I think a bit like we discussed with climate change, for us to impose pollution, for dictate to sovereign countries, it's not really that we can prescribe that. So our voice is for dialogue, our voice is for de-escalation, and our voice is for communication to encourage all parties to find a way through.
Yeah. So in your parliament, a lot of the voices that come from the Kashmiris, they kind of say, okay, create an environment, spell out and kind of call out India for what is happening in Indian-occupied Kashmir, etc. So, and there obviously every government can play a role, in terms of calling out to what India, to what is happening in the human rights issues.
So look, of course we talk about human rights concerns, and we raise those with the authorities in Delhi, as you would expect. But I repeat, for us to impose, say
you can't impose.
Say we decided, here's the blueprint for how to fix this issue, and this is what we think.
That's not right.
For both countries, and as I said, in accordance with the wishes of the Kashmiri people, I think people would say, well, this may have been an issue historically that was to do with you, but in the modern age, the UK, it's not for you to dictate. But I accept that strong voice in our parliament that comes, as you say, from people who have ties in the community here, and we therefore take that very seriously.
Let's take a break. नाज़रीन, ब्रेक लेते हैं, बाद वापस आते हैं, फिर बात उस पे करते हैं जो कि इशू जिसने इस वक्त पूरी दुनिया की जो है मरकूज़ की हुई अटेंशन, और वो है इशू अफ़गानिस्तान का इस ख़त्ते में, और जो ख़ास तौर पे ह्यूमैनिटेरियन क्राइसिस है, जिस तरह से दुनिया उसको रिस्पॉन्ड करी. स्टे विद अस. वेलकम बैक नाज़रीन. बात करेंगे हम हाई कमिश्नर साहब से मुख्तलिफ इशूज़ से. अफ़गानिस्तान भी है, बट बिफोर आई गो टू अफ़गानिस्तान, हाई कमिश्नर, देयर वाज अ स्मॉल ग्रुप, पाकिस्तान US group, which used to look at strategic issues and kind of work together. I was looking at the dates 2012-13. Now that you again have a lot of issues in the region and issues that overlap in terms of our interests, is there any chance of reviving that kind of strategic kind of dialogue where a focused team was there?
Yeah, but there's lots of this dialogue happening all the time. Actually, we have senior officials visiting from London this week, next week. We had our foreign secretary, our then foreign secretary, came here in late August. So there's a steady pattern of engagement, and as part of that, the two foreign ministers they agreed to step up that dialogue. So I worry sometimes we talk about those vehicles and we think that's what it's limited to. If a relationship is healthy, you would see me being very active, you'd see my counterpart, the Pakistan High Commissioner in London, equally active. And frankly, the more dialogue there is, the better. The
more interaction. So you're saying the platform doesn't become the...
I don't think the platform needs to be the issue. Bureaucrats like platforms, but they're not an end in themselves. It's the results.
If I tell you a bureaucrat asked this question...
You remember Sir Humphrey, a famous figure in London.
Yeah. So anyway, on bilateral, just one question that comes to mind. Is there ever going to be any question of extraditing our political people who are there? I mean, the government has been always talking about it. Yeah. Whether it's Prime Minister Nawaz.
So this also I see links to the close links between our two populations. Yeah. And because we have such a lot of back and forth, there are positives to that. I'd like more trade, I'd like more investment, but there are things that happen when our law enforcement want people back and forth. There is no barrier currently to extradition, and we do extradite people in both ways. What we don't have is a treaty to do that, and all a treaty would do is put in place the system to make it a bit quicker and easier because we pre-agree certain parameters for it.
So, but no treaty doesn't rule out extradition.
No.
Has the government of Pakistan ever said to you, hey, Mr. High Commissioner, send the former Prime Minister back to Pakistan?
I knew you'd want to ask me that question, and I am not allowed to talk about specific cases.
Okay, forget it.
Because that is...
I asked you and you didn't want to
That
respond.
is between them and the government of Pakistan. But generally, I've been very clear. I mean, I would like to see an extradition treaty signed. I think that would be a good thing for us to have. And I see no reason why we shouldn't do that reasonably quickly if everyone wanted it. But it doesn't stop, if those requests are put in, a response being made to work through it.
So extradition treaty means political cases get taken care of in a kind of more definitely. I mean, I'm just trying to understand because you said earlier on...
So a treaty formalises arrangements.
Okay.
That exist anyway between countries.
Sure.
So if someone rings up and says, or writes and says, we would like this individual, then we respond accordingly as you'd expect.
Depending on not just one, I mean, multiple...
Well, according to the rules and laws of our system. So
you
often hear me say on these sorts of issues, we will play it with a straight bat.
Yeah.
We have to follow our rules and systems.
The bat that is your rules and systems. Okay, so let's now talk about Afghanistan, very, very important for all of us. During the Troika Plus... meeting in Pakistan, the Afghan acting foreign minister was here. Did you meet them?
So I did meet some of that Troika team, and look, I should say that we have been very, very focused on the situation in Afghanistan through events after the fall of Kabul, and very much see, how much our interests are aligned. So what Pakistan is looking for and what the UK is looking for are completely the same, and that Troika statement, frankly, I agree with all of it, and is very much in line with what the UK would like to see happen.
So you had Ambassador Simon Grass visit Kabul, right?
That's right. So there's a big debate.
Any follow-up?
Yes, there has been, and there's a big debate about engagement. And the British envoy, Simon Gass, that you mentioned, was the first Western envoy to visit Kabul.
That's right.
So my Prime Minister is very clear. He thinks we need to engage. All countries at the minute are being cautious about formal recognition, and we recognise states,
Pakistan is also
governments.
very clear, no formal recognition.
Yeah, so I think together we will do that. But we have to have conversations because our interests are engaged. But if you look at those things we all agree on, we all agree we'd like to see an inclusive government. We all agree that we want stability and we don't want lots of migrants and refugees. We all agree that we don't want Afghanistan to again become a haven for terrorists to launch attacks against other countries, including Pakistan. We agree that we think there should be a role for women and girls in Afghan society, including an education for girls. So all of these things actually that were in the Troika statement are issues where the UK, Russia, China, the US, the UK, actually I think what makes me confident in a very difficult situation is that actually the objectives we want are very much the same.
And to top the list of these objectives is the humanitarian aspect. So, I've been talking to a lot of ambassadors here, EU ambassadors, and they're actually making an effort, sending out, etc. And what is UK's view on this?
So the UK is one of the largest donors of humanitarian aid to Afghanistan.
As we speak?
As we speak. So we announced nearly 300 million of overall assistance for Afghanistan and the region, and 50 million of that is for immediate humanitarian needs. This is a lot of money from the British taxpayer to try and ensure that people do not go hungry as winter approaches. The very complicated challenge is how that money then gets spent by aid agencies, and the very serious question of what we call liquidity. So is there enough cash in circulation in Afghanistan to pay for drivers, for trucks, for fuel? And there's a lot of very urgent work going on together between our countries and others to try and find a solution for that.
Have you told your very best friend, the US, to unfreeze?
I always talk to my good friend, the US, Sharif.
They have
but it's
$8 billion.
It's a good example of how we have to work together. And look, 8 billion, 9 billion. The question of the frozen assets, I think, is slightly separate.
No, but I mean, I was talking to some people yesterday, some ambassadors, and they felt, I mean, European ambassadors, that there is a kind of contradiction, because on the one hand we need to put in as much as we can. I mean, if you look at the UN reports, it seems like it can be catastrophic if sufficient funds aren't given. And
but my point is that the UN needs assessment is actually a much smaller amount of money.
Really?
It's in the hundreds of millions for the next few months.
Salaries, etc.
Salaries,
that's a major issue.
Immediate humanitarian need, it's in the hundreds of millions, not the billions. And this is where I think we have to understand everybody's politics. For the big governments of the West to hand over a lot of those frozen assets will not just be politically controversial.
It's basically the US, right?
But, well, no, not just the US, other countries too.
How much are you
It'll have politics. We have very small number of frozen assets compared to other countries. But I'm trying to emphasize that we have to understand the other side's perspective. That's what diplomacy is all about. And to ask that money to be handed over is politically difficult. It's also legally difficult, because people will challenge it in the courts. And that's why I think your question was the right one. What about the humanitarian need? How do we get grain, wheat, basic needs, medicines in for the winter? And that's actually a more manageable prospect that we need to work urgently to.
Yeah, I hope it's manageable, because when you look at the reports that the UN is putting on, they're saying that you really need to expedite it at a speed which it seems like it's not happening. So finally, in Pakistan's handling of the situation, how helpful was Pakistan in helping to get the British out of Afghanistan?
So I've got nothing but praise for the Pakistan system. And look, if you go to my point that our interests are actually aligned on this, if we look around and ask who are we going to work with on these issues, well, Pakistan as one of our oldest partners and strongest allies in this part of the world is obviously the place we're going to be coming and talking and working together on. And this question of safe passage, there are obviously people in Afghanistan who we felt we had an obligation to, who'd worked with us during the time we spent there in the last 20 years. And, I'm very clear, and I'd like to thank the government of Pakistan for helping us work with that and make sure we're giving assistance to those people.
Good. I hope we keep working together in a positive manner in the future. Thank you so much, High Commissioner. It was wonderful to have you on the show.
It's my pleasure. Very good talking to you. Thank you.
थैंक यू नाज़रीन, इसी पर आज का प्रोग्राम ख़त्म करते हैं। खुदा हाफिज़। पाकिस्तान जिंदाबाद।